One of the most important things for us is to feel that we are in control of the environment. When we feel that we have agency, when we have control, that is important for our well-being. When we feel that agency has been restricted, that can cause us anxiety. For example, one of the reasons that people feel really anxious on planes is not necessarily because they fear the worst, but because they don't have control, right? The door locks and you don't have control anymore. Like, you don't know. You can be in the plane for many more hours than you expected. You don't know what you're going to eat. It's like the lack of control. So anytime when we don't have control, that causes anxiety, and it can cause anxiety with interactions. If you feel that you don't have control within a relationship, whether it's with a partner or your children or your parents, that can have a very negative effect.
Welcome back to the show. My guest today is Tali Sharot, a neuroscientist and professor of cognitive neuroscience at University College London, whose research has reshaped how we understand decision-making, belief, and human emotion. She is the author of several influential books, including The Optimism Bias, The Influential Mind, and most recently, Look Again, co-written with Cass Sunstein. Her work explores why we believe what we believe, how emotion shapes our choices, and why we so often stop noticing what's right in front of us, both the good and the bad. Tali's research has profound implications for our everyday lives, but also for society at large, from the way misinformation spreads, to how democracies decline, to how technology and algorithms influence what we see, think, and feel. Tali, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Your recent research examines how humans and AI create feedback loops that influence each other. What are you discovering about how AI systems change not just our decisions, but actually how they reshape how we think?
Yeah, so we were looking at how interacting with AI will change the way that you then go on to make decisions, and the beliefs that you have. One thing that we looked at is biases. So I think from relatively early on, it was shown that AI has biases because it's simply reflecting human bias, right? So we feed the AI human data in order to learn, and some of the data is biased. So it's going to actually then reflect back the biases that humans have. And also, what has been known before we even came in is that the AI doesn't just reflect the biases, and we've shown this as well. It actually enhances them. So it takes the bias as sort of a signal that can help it make better prediction. And it therefore enhances the biases that's already in the data. And it could be any type of biases. So sure, it could be social biases. So it could be, biases relating to gender or to race, but it could also be other biases that we have in decision making. It's been shown that AI shows optimism bias. So basically any bias that you have in humans, whether it's beliefs and social or perceptual, you will find it in an eye as well, and the eye will enhance it. So just to give you an example, so if you put in, and I don't know if this is still true, but when I tried this last, I put in cognitive neuroscientist and all the images, and I put this in one of the generative AI, and all the images that came back were of men, white men, most of them wearing button-down shirts in the blue color. That's just an example. Okay, so we know this, and this is what we were thinking. Well, if the AI not only reflects our biases, but even enhances those biases, what we expect to happen is that the human would learn from the AI and become even more biased than they were before, right? We learn through interactions, we learn from other humans, and it makes sense. We would learn from the AI and will become more biased. And so this is exactly what we found. We did experiments ranging on very different things. We did kind of perceptual experiments where you have biases in where you think dots are moving. Other experiments where it turns out that if you see faces, a group of faces really fast, you will think that they're more unhappy than they actually are. So when we train the AI on human data, it catches that bias and it enhances it. So it's more likely to say this group of people are unhappy than they actually are. And when you then have the human interact with the AI, making decisions together, the human then learns a bias. And later on, when it makes decisions on its own, they're now more likely to say the group of people are more unhappy than they are. We've done this with asking questions like, Who do you think is most likely to be a financial advisor? So there's a bias where people think white males are more likely to be financial advisors, which is actually turns out is not true in many countries. But if the bias is in the population, which is not in every population, but it enhances it, the AI then enhances it further. And then you are interacting with the AI. Let's say you're putting together some presentation and you need a picture of a financial advisor. All the pictures that come back are white males. And then later on, your belief changes. If I ask you, what's the probability of a financial advisor being a white male, you will become more biased than before. And so now you have the human more biased than he was before. And now, of course, what happens in the world is that the human data is now fed back into the AI again, right? So it's a continuous loop where we start with a small bias, it becomes greater in the eye, then it becomes greater in the human, then it becomes greater in the eye, and so forth and so forth.
This snowball effect.
Yeah, exactly. But let me also give you the good news that in cases where the AI is accurate, the humans also become more accurate. So we learn from the AI whether it's good or bad, biased or accurate, we are going to learn. And so if we can catch these problems early on and correct them in the AI, we actually have an opportunity to correct human bias and get people to be actually more accurate in their judgments.
Think about a song you really like. Would you rather listen to this from beginning to end with no interruptions, or would you rather have breaks in the song every 20 seconds or so? There'll be a small break. So you're listening to your favorite song every 20 seconds or so, there's suddenly a break, and then you have to wait for the song to restart. That question is posed to many people. What's people's response to that question?
Our latest book, Look Again, which is about habituation. And yeah, this is one of the most fun experiments in the book where a group of psychologists asked people, would you rather listen to a song beginning to end, no interruption, or a song with interruptions? And of course, everyone says, I don't want interruptions, right? I want to listen to the song from beginning to end. But then when they actually do the experiment, they have one group of participants, they listen to the song beginning to end, no interruption. And then they have the other group with little interruptions. They find quite surprisingly that actually people enjoy the song more with interruptions, and they're willing to pay double to listen to the band in a concert. So why is that? And here's the answer. It relates to habituation, which is what that book is about. And habituation is this idea that if you experience the same thing again and again and again, it elicits less of a reaction in you, less of an emotional reaction, less of a physiological reaction. In this case, a good reaction. So when you start listening to a song that you like, you have a really strong positive experience. And as the song goes on, you still have a positive experience, but you may go down over time a little bit, right? You're still enjoying it at the end, but not as much as the beginning. However, if I have little breaks, what happens is you experience dishabituation. So if you have a little break and then the music comes back on, that feeling of joy goes back up, right? It jumps back up because of that little break. And so now you're enjoying it more. There's another little break. Again, it goes back up and so on and so forth. So overall, if you kind of sum up the joy, you're enjoying it more with those breaks. And they showed similar things using different kind of situations. They asked about a massage. Would you rather have a massage beginning to end, no interruption, or do you want to have a massage with little interruptions in between? Again, everyone said, I don't want breaks in my massage. I don't want interruptions. Again, they did the actual experiment. Half of the subject got a massage without breaks, and the other got a massage with breaks. And lo and behold, once again, they found that, in fact, counter to our intuition, people actually overall enjoy the massage more with breaks. And again, the assumption is that what is happening is really enjoying the massage, but you kind of like, not, it's going down over time, a break. And then when the massage starts over, you're attending it to more, right? You're noticing it more. And so the joy kind of pops up again.
You did some work with a large tourism company, and they brought you in. They wanted to know, when are people happiest on vacation and what makes them happy? What did you find when you were speaking to a lot of people?
Well, now that we've learned a little bit about habituation, then listeners may kind of have better idea of what we're about to find. But yes, the question was, when are people the happiest and what makes them happiest? And so we actually got to go in the resorts and to talk to them and ask them what made you happy and so on. And the first thing that we found is that the happiest time was 43 hours in. So that it was enough time for people to unpack and really kind of focus on fun, right? But from that moment on, which is day two, joy started dwindling slowly, slowly. And again, people were still happy on day 6, 7, 8, but not as happy as they were on day two. And when we looked at what was the word that people used more than any other word when we asked them about their happiest time on vacation, it was the word first. The first view of the ocean, the first cocktail I had, the first sandcastle I built. The second view of the ocean was quite good. The second cocktail, the third cocktail, the fourth cocktail was good, but it wasn't as good as the first. Because what happens is that the first time that you see the ocean, right? The first, that brings like a really strong reaction. So first is exciting and it's novel. But over time, if you experience the same thing again and again, you wake up, it's the same view, it's still wonderful, you still get joy out of it, but a little bit less and a little bit less, right? So it's habituation. Just as we habituated to the massage or the song, we kind of habituate a little bit to our wonderful surroundings on vacation. And so you might think that perhaps if you want to get the most joy out of a vacation, you might take shorter ones, right? Get more of that like 43 hours in, rather than having a long one where like joy kind of goes down over time. Not always possible if you're going far away, like where you are today, but shorter trips. We could have shorter uh, vacations, but more frequent ones as well.
How did this research, how does it play into the idea of sort of hedonistic, not hedonistic, but like hedonic happiness versus eudaimonic, meaning, purpose, versus sort of chasing more peak experiences, excitement? Is there a, not a dark side, but a risk to double clicking on the more peak experiences? This idea of trying to chase these highs?
The kind of joy, the hedonics versus a meaning. In fact, both of them habituate. So joy can habituate, but also a sense of meaning can habituate as well. So imagine, you start off and you have a very meaningful job. Perhaps you're a cancer researcher or teacher, whatever it is, it's very meaningful. And so it feels like it at the beginning, right? But as the years go by, you kind of know, it's still meaningful, but it feels maybe a little bit less so over time. It just feels more routine. So I would like to suggest that it is both the hedonics and the purpose, the feeling of purpose and meaning, that can go down over time. They can both go down over time. And so once you introduce things like breaks, or another thing that we haven't talked about, variety, what you're doing is you're boosting not only the joy, but also probably the sense of meaning. Right. So if you're working, I mean, and this is, I feel it's something that organizations are, whether consciously or unconsciously, aware of, because it's not uncommon in some places to have like sabbaticals, right? So academics, they go on sabbaticals. Doctors get some time off. Like, I have a friend, she's in finance, and apparently she gets 2 or 3 months off every few years, right? So so it's a sort of a break, and the idea is that if you go away, and you have a break, when you come back, you will be able to see things with fresh eyes. And so hopefully both the kind of like the joy of the thing, right? The joy of like interacting with people in your job, whatever it is, the joy of like my view outside my window, that is something that will create a reaction in me, but also the kind of sense of purpose and meaning. If you're an ER doctor and you haven't been in the ER for a few months, when you come back, maybe like the adrenaline of like, okay, I'm helping someone, and maybe that would be more salient than it was before. So breaks is one way to dishabituate. Another way to enhance kind of the joy and the meaning is also to just create variety, to make changes. Um, And it could be even like superficial changes. You could have big changes where you're actually changing professions or you're changing just the organization that you're working in, right? That would totally create dishabituation. Or it could be even smaller than that. One things that I do is I go to spinning class. When I go to the spinning class, I always sit in the same exact place. I take the same bike. But then one day the bike was taken, I had to take another bike. And that completely changed the experience. Just viewing the class from a different viewpoint actually dishabituated me to some extent, right? Or going running, like I do the same route, right? So it's the other day, actually, last week, I took a totally different route in a different place. I haven't been there. Again, absolutely different experience. So it could be things like that. You can take a commute via a different route. Different color in your room, those things would actually induce some sort of dishabituation in you. One reason is also that once you kind of change things around, you usually have to learn, especially when it's kind of like a more substantial changes, you have to learn something new, right? If I'm now working on a different type of project or I go I go travel to a different place, there's things I need to learn, right? I need to learn the culture, or maybe even the language if I'm and learning is something that also brings both happiness and meaning.
I heard you mention a quote. It was by an economist. I forgot the guy's name. It said about pleasure results from incomplete and intermittent satisfaction of desires. And this kind of sums up this whole idea that we've been discussing.
Right. So that's Tybor-Skitowski breaks, right? If you think back to our experiment, to the experiment with the music or the experiment with massages, that is kind of the idea.
When I heard that quote and when I heard this idea of incomplete, a lack of completion, something being withheld, um, it made me think about this idea in different contexts. So it made me think of in TV, like the cliffhanger. So, for
Hmm.
example, there's when there's a closed loop, there's a sense of completion, a sense of satisfaction, a sense of it's. But when a loop remains open or unanswered, there's a lack of catharsis. And I remember what someone was once telling me about the original Italian Job. I think it was 60s, 1970s. And on the final scene, the car is on the edge of the cliff. The heist is on one side of the cliff, and then the people on the other, and it's rocking. And then it suddenly goes to black. And 30, 40, 50 years later, people are still debating this final ending. What happened? Did they, I think Michael Caine said, I've got an idea, guys. And then it goes to black. And so it's this idea of this un a lack of catharsis, an unopened loop, and it just drives us crazy. We keep on replaying it, and it drives us crazy, but it's also magnetic. There's a potency about it. And then I was also thinking about in stand-up comedy, a comedian might create the setup of, the set up the joke, and then suddenly he'll go off, or she'll go off in some other direction, and then we have to wait for the punchline. And then once again, there's this idea of this extension of the setup, and then that sense of catharsis. And so I was thinking about this idea of these incomplete and intermittent satisfactions of desires. It's infuriating, but also so magnetic at the same time, and it's kind of got that tension there.
Yeah, no, because if you spoon feed people, they are less engaged. They're not part of it, right? But if you leave things open, then they need to think and come up with their own solutions and imagination. And what you're actually inducing is cognitive pleasure, which is actually something like a major thing that we're studying in my group, like cognitive pleasure. Um, yeah, so I agree. I think there's maybe a little bit too much of like tying everything neatly with a nice bow, nowadays, whether it's in film or any like literature, that it always has to be all the no loose ends. They all have to be tied up. But in fact, I absolutely agree with you. It's nice to have some of those things untied, and so it is up to the person who's viewing or listening to come up with their own solutions to it. And because we're a curious creature, we're very curious, we will continue kind of focusing on that in our mind, which really means that the impact of that work will be greater. Of course, like you don't want to go all the way to the other side. Sometimes things are just like so confusing, right? But
Sure.
it's kind of a balance. It's a bit of a balance. Yeah.
In some ways, it's too early to know. The data's not in. And I think over the next 10, 15, 20 years, we'll have a much better idea. But I'm fascinated about the world of AI, artificial intelligence, and people are forming emotional relationships with AI assistants. And from a neuroscience perspective, what's what would you what's your do you have a hypothesis? What is happening in our brains when we seek emotional connections with artificial systems?
In some ways, I think this is not new because people often have emotional connections to objects, right? So an easy example is children. They are really connected to their little teddy bear or whatever it is, right? And what they project on that teddy bear or whatever, um, things that are unique to human. Um, so you have a thing. And so that's something that you see all the time. And it's true for people. I don't know. I have things that I sort of love, and I have an emotional connection to, which are, I don't know, my car. Um, so I think the difference here, is that AI, it's not an object. So that's the main difference. But what it does give you, it gives you all the things that you can expect from a human, right? It gives you a sense that it's understanding, a sense that it has insight, a sense that it has emotion. So in some ways, it's less surprising that we will connect with that, right? Maybe it's more surprising that you can see people connecting to things that are just objects. And in fact, I don't know, think about animals. Like maybe there's some kind of like analogy here as well. I mean, people are very connected to their animals and animals are living creatures. Um, but and they do experience some emotion and so on, but I'm sure you're projecting on your pet a lot of the things that it probably is not experiencing. Like, some pets are very clever and all of that, but I'm sure that you are projecting way more than it actually is experiencing or thinking or knows. So this to me feels like just kind of like an extension of all of these other incidents that we know and see around us all the time.
I'm smiling because I was thinking about this idea of bias again, where when you were saying people project more onto their pets than is actually there, I was imagining pet owners being like, other pet owners do that, but my pet actually is really intelligent and really intuitive. I'm speaking today, actually, this afternoon, to Anil Seth, the neuroscientist, and I'm curious his thoughts about AI consciousness. That'll be interesting.
To me, I'm not saying the AI has the emotion or has like preferences or anything like that, but it's easy to project on it because it looks like it does, right?
Sure.
Um, just like the
Yeah.
animal, which animal does have some of these things for sure, but we project onto it things that it doesn't really have.
Yeah, there was a huge, massive, when they released GPT-5, the new version, there was a huge backlash because some of the older models were just discontinued immediately, and people had formed a real emotional bond to their version 4, whatever they were working with. And suddenly for that to disappear overnight, the way that it spoke, the way that it communicated, a lot of people felt like they'd lost a friend or something like that. And so then there was this quick reinstallment of some of the older models, which was, I think, surprising to many people how much of a close bond people had formed with their favorite model of their GBT.
Yeah. But in fact, I just discovered recently that you can go in and choose kind of the personality of the GPT that you want to interact with. So I mean, there's not many options there, but you could be like, oh, they're more. I don't remember the names. We can look back, more empathetic, or but I chose the straightforward one, like cut to the chase. And since I did that, oh my God, I enjoy it so much more. So I think in the past, I mean, I couldn't form an emotional connection because it's kind of like all positive, like answers.
You got this. You're a hero. Great research.
Not my style. Yeah, so I couldn't like connect with that. It was kind of annoying. It seems like artificial. But since I changed it, well, now I absolutely have a little bit of this connection forming, um, for sure, and I enjoy it more. I use it more. So yeah, this is a little
if,
tip. If you go to ChatGPT, go to your preferences and change it to the personality that you like to interact with.
if you were designing AI systems from a neuroscientist's perspective, what safeguards would you build in to protect human mental health and decision-making independence?
Mm. Goodness, that is a tough question because there's so many different elements that could impact, so many of our elements. I think what ChatGPT does actually do quite well from, my interaction, what I saw from the interaction, it does leave you with a sense of agency. And that's one of the most important things for humans. So, one of the most important things for us is to feel that we are in control of the environment. When we feel that we have agency, when we have control, that is important for our well-being. When we feel that agency has been restricted, that can cause us anxiety. For example, one of the reasons that people feel really anxious on planes is not necessarily because they fear the worst, but because they don't have control. Right, the door locks and you don't have control anymore. Like you don't know. You can be in the plane for many more hours than you expected. You don't know what you're going to eat. It's like the lack of control. So anytime when we don't have control, that causes anxiety, and it can cause anxiety with interactions. Right, if you feel that you don't have control within a relationship, whether it's with a partner or your children or your parents, that can have a very negative effect. And that is a characteristic of many mental health conditions, where there's kind of a sense that there is an agency. And if I don't have agency, I can't make things better. It goes back to optimism, right? If I don't have agency, then people are less optimistic. Well, I feel like ChatGPT gives you a sense of agency at all times. That's my sense from the interaction, right? It doesn't really tell you what to do, but it gives you but it guides you at the same time. Um, it's also good. I'm saying the good stuff. I'm going to think about the bad stuff later, but it's also good at asking you questions, right? So it gives you a sense that it wants to help, that it's interested. Again, things that are very, very important and very good in a relationship. So if we think about it as a relationship, it does all of those things. So I think the negative part of it, there might be a negative part, which I can mention, but I don't think it relates to mood and mental health. When it comes to mental health, so we know that in general, humans do overestimate their agency and they're overestimating their control. That is less of the case in depression. So part of the problem in depression is that there isn't an overestimation, for example, of how much you're controlling the environment. But a lot of these bias, like optimism bias, right? It's it's a healthy thing. So I mean, it's unhealthy in some ways. Again, we could you might underestimate your risk, therefore not go to medical screenings. But when it comes to mental health, at least like a certain optimism bias and like overconfidence, a, a certain amount is actually good for your mental health. And it is people who lack that. And I mean, we have so many studies showing that you don't have an optimism bias in depression. And that turns out to be a problem. So when it comes to like your happiness and your mood and your mental health, accuracy is not necessarily the medicine, right? So, in fact, if we saw the world as it really is, and we saw ourselves as we really are, and we saw our relationships as they really are, it probably would not have a good effect on your mental health. So, some kind of delusion is actually a good thing. Now, of course, you can go to the extremes. I mean, a lot of mental health conditions are actually characterized by delusions that are over exact, so we can go there as well. Um, but perceived agency overall will do you good. You can, unless you're getting into like mania and like, all of that. But um, kind of a decent amount is a good thing. It's better than reality. It's better than knowing things exactly how they are. And people can sometimes disagree because they think like, oh no, I'm seeing things clearly, but they're not. So like we're doing all the many experiments where people come and say I'm a realist, and then we do the experiments and they don't know like what we're looking for, and we like find that almost everyone, 80% of the population, do have overconfidence, do have optimism bias, right? And they're not even aware of it. So I think for mental health and mood and happiness, on average, perceived agency is what we care about, um, more so than agency itself. They're correlated, right? It's like they're often not like super dissociated. Um, Now, but then there's other things, right? I mean, the fact that we are getting like misinformation, or we're just getting a part, we're only seeing a sliver of what reality is, that can cause all sorts of other problems, like social problems, politics, and so on. Even with simple things like you mentioned Netflix. Sure, so I can stay with my own preferences again and again and again, but you could be in what like scientists call a local maxima. So I'm like, I always watch rom-coms and I love rom-coms and I'm super happy, but like I've never watched thrillers, so I don't know that actually I can be happier, right? So some exploration is actually something that is really important, and it's something that humans do. So I guess we don't want to eliminate the exploration, right? Whether it's exploration of knowledge, of any kind of experiences, by giving people what they believe they want because they don't know what the other things are.
And it also ties into that idea of habituation. If I'm always watching
Hmm.
rom-coms every day,
Right.
then rom-coms, stop having that. I'm cautious of the time. Just a couple of quick ones just to finish. People can kiss a celebrity. They can kiss them now, or they have to wait. And they're given some options. Do you want to kiss the celebrity now? Do you want to wait 10 minutes, an hour? What did that show?
Yeah, so that's a study by George Lowenstein. He's a behavioral economist. And to explain you what this means, let's go back to the holiday experiment. So I told you that the happiest day was day 2. It's 43 hours into the holiday, but that's not quite true. Because in fact, when they tested people for every day for the week before vacation, every day for the week of vacation, and every day for the week after vacation, they actually found the happiest day was the day before vacation. So it was the day before. They were still in the office working on the computers, but in their mind, they were on vacation. And in the mind, it was quite wonderful. When they went on vacation, it was good, but it's not quite good as it was in your imagination, right, the day before. And so the point of that is to show, and that's done by a group of scientists at Harvard. And the point of that is to show that sometimes the imagination and the anticipation makes us more happy than the event itself. And so then George Lowenstein, what he did, he wanted to see, well, would people pay? Would they pay for the anticipation, right? And so the fun experiment that he did is he asked people to come up with a celebrity, and then said, okay, how much um, would you be willing to get a kiss from the celebrity if the celebrity just came into the room right now and gave you a kiss, or came in, an hour from now, 3 hours from now, 1 day, 3 days, a week, 10 years. And he found that people were willing to pay the most, not to get a kiss immediately, but to get a kiss in 3 days. In other words, they were willing to pay simply in order to wait. And so they didn't want to wait 10 years because they didn't want kind of an elderly celebrity, but 3 days was the optimal amount. And so why is that? Well, what they're paying for is they're paying for the anticipation, right? The excitement, um, which is real, right? It's a real thing, and so they're getting that as well as the kiss itself, and that's true. You go on holidays. If you have a holiday booked, you get excited maybe like weeks before, months before, and so like you're getting so much from that before you even leave. And in fact, sometimes you have to cancel last minute, but you still got a little bit of your money back, right? From just like the pure anticipation of it, or you have tickets for a concert that you're looking forward to. again, you're getting much from the imagination and anticipation of the event itself.
It's a new business idea. It's like a holiday, a tourism company, but you never actually have the holiday. People just pay for it and then you cancel their tickets.
They just
And then
plan, yeah.
you just plan. Tali, this has been fascinating. How can people find out more about you? How can people find out about your books? Where can we send them?
So books is easy. You can get them on Amazon or any other bookseller. And on our lab website, my lab is called affectivebrain.com. Affect is with an A. Sorry, affectivebrainlab.com. That's where you can go. You can find a lot of like the essays, but also the scientific papers and some of the talks and videos.
Tali, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking your late afternoon, early evening to speak with me. Yeah, it's been fascinating learning more about these studies. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you getting up in the middle of the night.